Hey, beautiful souls, welcome back to Soul Stories. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to join our family. Stay with us, because a new love story is about to begin. The first snowflake fell on Rebecca Sinclair's eyelash as she stepped off the stagecoach into Timberline Falls, a town so small it barely qualified as a dot on any respectable map. She brushed the flake away and surveyed her new home with the kind of determined optimism that had carried her through 26 years of disappointment. Behind her, the stagecoach driver tossed her single worn trunk into the mud without ceremony and snapped his reins before she could even say thank you. The horses lurched forward, and within moments, Rebecca stood alone on the frozen boardwalk of a town that clearly had not been expecting her arrival. The advertisement had promised a teaching position at a thriving mountain community with progressive values and excellent accommodations for single women. Rebecca now understood why the salary had seemed suspiciously generous. Timberline Falls consisted of one muddy street lined with buildings that leaned against each other like tired old men, a general store with a cracked window, a saloon that appeared to be doing brisk business despite the early hour, and a church with a crooked steeple that pointed accusingly at the heavy gray sky. The schoolhouse, she would later discover, had burned down 3 months ago and had not been rebuilt. She was contemplating whether she had enough money to purchase a return ticket when a voice behind her said, "You must be the new teacher." Rebecca turned to find a man watching her from the shadow of the general store awning. He was perhaps 30, with dark hair that curled slightly beneath a battered hat and eyes the color of rain clouds before a storm. His clothes were worn but clean, his boots caked with the kind of mud that suggested honest work, and his expression carried the careful neutrality of someone accustomed to being judged before he spoke a word. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, pale against his weathered skin, and Rebecca noticed that several townspeople crossing the street gave him a wide berth, their whispers floating on the cold air like accusations. "I am," Rebecca said, lifting her chin. "Rebecca Sinclair. And you are?" Something flickered in his eyes, surprised perhaps at her directness. "Silas Blackwood. I run the livery stable, such as it is." He nodded toward a building at the end of the street, its doors hanging slightly crooked on their hinges. "Mayor Compton asked me to collect you. Seems the boarding house is full up, and the hotel burned down same fire that took the school." Rebecca felt her optimism wavering. "Then where exactly am I supposed to stay?" Silas Blackwood did not answer immediately. Instead, he picked up her trunk with an ease that suggested considerable strength and began walking toward the livery. Rebecca followed, having no better option, her boots squelching in the mud with every step. Around them, the snow began falling faster, thick flakes that caught in her hair and melted on her cheeks like cold tears. The livery stable was warmer than she expected, heated by the bodies of several horses and a small iron stove in the corner. Silas set her trunk down and stood awkwardly, as if unsure what to do with his hands now that they were empty. "There's a cabin," he said finally, "up the mountain about 2 miles. Belonged to old Doc Morrison before he passed. Town's been meaning to fix it up, use it for emergencies. Storm coming in means the pass will close tonight, maybe for weeks. Mayor figured you could stay there until better arrangements can be made. Alone." Silas's jaw tightened. "That's the thing. Cabin's got supplies enough for 2 people through a long winter. Mayor wants someone up there who can manage the animals if travelers get stranded. Someone who knows the mountain." He paused. "Me?" Rebecca understood immediately. A single woman and a single man, alone in a cabin for potentially weeks. The scandal would be enough to destroy her reputation before she taught a single lesson. She opened her mouth to refuse, to demand another option, to insist that surely there must be somewhere else. But before she could speak, the wind outside rose to a howl that rattled the stable doors and sent the horses shifting nervously in their stalls. Through the gaps in the wooden walls, Rebecca saw the snow thickening into a white curtain that obscured everything beyond a few feet. The temperature had already dropped noticeably, and her thin eastern coat was proving woefully inadequate. "Storm's moving faster than expected," Silas said. "We leave now. We make it before the worst hits. We wait, and neither of us makes it anywhere." Rebecca looked at this strange, scarred man with his careful eyes and his gentle way with the nervous horses, and she made her decision. "Then we leave now." The ride up the mountain tested every ounce of Rebecca's courage. She had ridden horses before, proper Eastern horses on proper Eastern trails, but nothing had prepared her for the steep rocky path that wound through towering pines, while the wind screamed and the snow swirled so thick she could barely see her own hands on the reins. Silas rode ahead, stopping frequently to check that she still followed. His broad shoulders hunched against the cold, but his seat in the saddle as steady as if he were born there. By the time they reached the cabin, Rebecca's fingers were numb and her lips had turned blue. Silas lifted her from her horse before she could protest and carried her inside, setting her in a chair by the cold fireplace while he worked with quick efficiency to start a fire. Within minutes, flames crackled in the hearth and warmth began creeping back into her frozen limbs. "Thank you," she managed through chattering teeth. Silas handed her a blanket. "Coffee will be ready soon. You should eat something." The cabin was small but solidly built, with stone walls that blocked the wind and a roof that showed no signs of leaking despite the growing storm outside. There was one bed, one table, 2 chairs, and a corner sectioned off with a canvas curtain that presumably offered some measure of privacy. Rebecca noticed immediately that Silas had begun arranging bedding on the floor near the fire, clearly intending to give her the bed without discussion. Over the next several days, as the blizzard raged outside and the snow piled higher against the windows, Rebecca learned several things about Silas Blackwood. She learned that he had been a cavalry officer during the war, and that whatever he had seen there had left scars far deeper than the one on his face. She learned that he had come to Timberline Falls 5 years ago, seeking a place where no one knew his name or his history, and that someone in town had eventually recognized him and spread stories that may or may not have been true. She learned that he read poetry when he thought she was sleeping, his lips moving silently over the words of Whitman and Tennyson, and that his hands, capable of calming the most frightened horse, trembled slightly whenever she accidentally touched him. Most importantly, he learned that the stories the townspeople whispered were lies. "They say you killed a man," Rebecca said on the 4th night when the storm had paused and the silence between them had grown comfortable. "In Silver Valley. They say you robbed a bank and shot the sheriff." Silas stared into the fire. "They say a lot of things. Did you?" He was quiet for so long that Rebecca thought he might not answer. Then he said, "The man I killed was my commanding officer. He ordered us to fire on a village full of women and children. When we refused, he pulled his pistol and started shooting himself. I stopped him the only way I could." His voice was flat, empty of emotion, as if he had told this story to himself so many times that it no longer carried weight. The army called it murder. The newspapers called it worse. By the time I got out of prison, my name was attached to every crime within 500 miles. Rebecca reached across the space between them and took his hand. His fingers were rough and warm, and they curled around hers as if he were drowning and she was the only solid thing in a raging sea. "I believe you," she said. Those 3 words changed everything. The storm lasted 12 days. During that time, Rebecca and Silas built something neither had expected to find in the mountains of Colorado. They built trust through shared meals and shared silences, through conversations that stretched late into the night, and laughter that surprised them both. They built respect through the small kindnesses they showed each other, Silas always ensuring she had the warmest spot by the fire, Rebecca mending the tear in his coat with neat, even stitches. They built something that felt dangerously close to love, though neither spoke the word aloud. On the 8th day, a group of travelers appeared at their door, a family of 4 whose wagon had overturned on the mountain peak. Ass! The father had a broken arm. The mother was feverish, and the 2 children were terrified. Rebecca and Silas worked together seamlessly, setting the bone and treating the fever and comforting the children with stories and songs. The family stayed for 3 days, and when they finally continued their journey, the father shook Silas's hand with tears in his eyes and called him a hero. It was the first time anyone had called Silas Blackwood a hero in 15 years. On the 11th day, the storm briefly cleared, and riders from town appeared at the cabin. Sheriff Holloway led them, his face grim beneath his snow-covered hat. Behind him rode Mayor Compton and several other men Rebecca did not recognize, their expressions ranging from suspicious to hostile. "Miss Sinclair," the sheriff said, "we've come to escort you back to town." Rebecca stepped in front of Silas before she fully realized what she was doing. "I am perfectly safe here, Sheriff. Mr. Blackwood has been nothing but a gentleman." Mayor Compton snorted. "A gentleman? That's rich considering what he did in Silver Valley." "What he did in Silver Valley was save innocent lives," Rebecca said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "He stopped a massacre. He was punished for doing what was right, and he has spent every year since then paying for the cowardice of men who should have stood with him." The clearing fell silent, except for the wind whistling through the pines. Sheriff Holloway's expression shifted from grim to thoughtful. The other men exchanged uncertain glances. Behind her, Rebecca felt Silas step closer, his presence warm and steady at her back. "How do you know that?" the mayor demanded. "Because I listened," Rebecca said. "Because I looked at the man instead of the rumors. Because I did what any decent person should do before passing judgment." She lifted her chin. "Now, if you want to escort someone back to town, I suggest you escort me, because I have a school to rebuild and children to teach, and I have wasted quite enough time on gossip and narrow minds." She turned on her heel and walked back into the cabin to gather her things. Behind her, she heard Sheriff Holloway say quietly, "Well, that's quite a woman." And she heard Silas Blackwood reply, just as quietly, "Yes, she is." The ride back to town was different. Silas rode beside her now, not ahead, and the men from town kept a respectful distance. When they reached the main street of Timberline Falls, Rebecca noticed that the whispers had changed. People still stared at Silas, but their expressions held curiosity rather than hostility, questions rather than accusations. Mayor Compton found her a room at the boarding house after all. It turned out someone had moved on to Denver just that morning and promised that the schoolhouse would be rebuilt by spring. Sheriff Holloway quietly admitted that he had always suspected the Silver Valley stories were exaggerated and that he would look into clearing Silas's name properly. But it was what happened that evening that Rebecca would remember for the rest of her life. She was standing on the boardwalk outside the general store, watching the sunset paint the snow-covered mountains in shades of gold and rose, when Silas appeared beside her. He had cleaned up, shaved, changed into clothes that looked almost new. In his hands he held a single winter rose, white petals edged with frost. "I don't know how to court a woman properly," he said, his voice rough with nerves. "I don't know the right words or the right gestures. All I know is that 12 days ago, I was a man with nothing but ghosts and a bad reputation. And then you looked at me like I was worth something, like I might still have a future." He offered her the rose. "I don't have much, Reb. Eka, a run-down stable and a name most folks still curse. But I have a heart that somehow started beating again when you walked off that stagecoach. And if you'll have me, that heart is yours." Rebecca took the rose. Its petals were soft against her frozen fingers, beautiful despite the cold that surrounded it. Like hope, she thought, like the beginning of something new. "I came to Timberline Falls to start over," she said, "to build a life I could be proud of. To find a place where I belonged." She stepped closer to him, close enough to see the hope and fear warring in his storm-gray eyes. "I think I may have found something even better." When she kissed him, the last light of sunset blazed across the mountains like a blessing. Somewhere in the distance, wolves howled, and the wind picked up, promising more snow before morning. But standing there in the cold with Silas Blackwood's arms around her and his heart beating steady against her own, Rebecca Sinclair felt warmer than she had ever felt in her life. The town of Timberline Falls would tell this story for generations. They would tell how a schoolteacher from the east looked past the scars and the rumors and saw the man underneath. They would tell how Silas Blackwood rebuilt not just the schoolhouse, but his entire life. How he became sheriff after Holloway retired. How he and Rebecca raised 4 children who grew up knowing that courage meant standing for what was right, even when the whole world stood against you. They would tell how mercy came down from the mountain that winter, wrapped in a blizzard and carried in the heart of a woman who refused to judge by whispers and assumptions. And they would tell how 2 people, both broken in their own ways, found in each other the pieces they needed to become whole. The mountain watched over them, ancient and patient, its peaks white with eternal snow and summer. Here in its rocky heart, perhaps even the mountain smiled, knowing that some storms destroy while others create, and that the coldest winters often give way to the most beautiful springs.